I always thought the stories about haunted mirrors were just that, stories. Ghost tales to be shared around a campfire or during a sleepover. That was until I found the mirror at an antique shop on a quiet afternoon. It was a beautiful piece, large and ornately framed, with a glass so clear it seemed to draw you in. I couldn't resist buying it, despite the odd look the shopkeeper gave me when I made the purchase. I brought the mirror home to my small apartment. It was cozy but a bit worn, with creaky floors and drafty windows that gave it a certain charm. I placed the mirror in the living room, leaning it against the wall opposite the couch. It added a touch of elegance to the space, reflecting the warm light from the floor lamp and making the room feel larger. The first few days with the mirror were uneventful. I admired it every time I walked past, pleased with my find. My routine was simple: work, come home, cook dinner, watch some TV, then head to bed. But soon, small, strange things began to happen. At first, it was just a feeling of unease, like someone was watching me. I brushed it off, blaming it on the old building and my overactive imagination. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, I noticed a shadow move in the reflection of the mirror. It was just a flicker, barely noticeable, but it made me stop and look closer. I turned around, expecting to see someone or something behind me, but there was nothing. The room was empty, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the sizzle of food in the pan. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. But the shadow kept appearing, each time a little clearer, a little more defined. It moved in ways that didn't match my own movements, lingering in the background, just out of focus. It was unsettling, to say the least. One night, while watching TV, I glanced at the mirror and saw the shadow again. This time, it was unmistakable. A dark, humanoid figure standing in the corner of the room, its head slightly tilted as if it was observing me. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I turned to look directly at the corner, but again, there was nothing there. Just an empty space. The occurrences became more frequent. The shadow seemed to grow bolder, appearing more often and for longer periods. I started to dread being in the living room alone, but I couldn't bring myself to move the mirror. It felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that something was truly wrong. One night, I decided to test my sanity. I set up my phone to record while I slept, positioning it to capture the mirror. That night, I slept fitfully, plagued by nightmares of dark figures and cold, empty eyes. When I woke up, I almost forgot about the recording. It wasn't until I was having my morning coffee that I remembered. I played the footage back, heart racing. For the first few hours, there was nothing. Just the peaceful, if slightly eerie, reflection of my living room. But then, around 2 a.m., the shadow appeared. It slowly emerged from the side of the mirror, stepping into the frame as if it was entering the room. It stood there, motionless, watching. I felt a wave of nausea as I watched the figure on the screen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The figure moved closer to the edge of the mirror, then seemed to vanish. I rewound the footage, watching it over and over, hoping to find some explanation, some trick of the light that I had missed. But it was always the same. The shadow was real. I showed the footage to my friend, Lisa. She was skeptical at first, but the look on her face as she watched the video told me she was just as unnerved as I was. She suggested getting rid of the mirror, but something inside me resisted. I needed to understand what was happening. I started researching haunted mirrors, looking for any clue that might explain my situation. I read about mirrors being portals, about spirits trapped within them, about ancient rituals used to cleanse them. The more I read, the more frightened I became. The stories were too similar to my own experience. One night, after another sighting of the shadow, I decided to confront it. I stood in front of the mirror, heart pounding, and spoke aloud. "Who are you? What do you want?" The reflection stared back at me, unchanged. I felt foolish, talking to a mirror, but I was desperate. That night, I dreamed of the shadow. It was clearer than ever, standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It reached out, and I felt a cold hand on my leg. I woke up with a start, gasping for breath. My leg was icy cold where the shadow had touched me. The next day, I decided enough was enough. I had to get rid of the mirror. I called a local antique dealer and arranged for them to take it away. As they loaded it into their truck, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Would the shadow leave with the mirror, or had I only angered it? That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The apartment felt lighter, more peaceful. I began to believe that I had made the right decision. But the peace didn't last. A few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night to the feeling of being watched. I looked around, but the room was empty. I got up to get a glass of water, trying to shake off the feeling. As I passed by the empty spot where the mirror had been, I saw it. The shadow, standing in the corner, watching me. My heart stopped. It was no longer bound to the mirror. It was here, in my home, and it wasn't going away. I moved out the next day, leaving behind everything I couldn't carry. I never told the new tenants about the shadow, about the figure that watched me from the dark. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wanted to believe that I was free, that I could escape the nightmare. But even now, in my new apartment, far away from that cursed mirror, I sometimes see it. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow that doesn't belong. And I know, deep down, that it will always be with me. Watching, waiting, haunting my every step. It all started with a letter. My family and I had just moved into our dream home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house was perfect, spacious, modern, and nestled in a friendly community. We were thrilled to start our new life there. It was a warm summer evening when I found the first letter in our mailbox. It was addressed to the new owners and contained a single sentence that sent a chill down my spine. "Welcome to the neighborhood, we've been watching you." At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe from some kids in the area. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash, brushing off the uneasy feeling that settled in my stomach. Over the next few days, I focused on unpacking and getting settled, trying to forget about the letter. My wife, Sarah, and our two kids, Emma and Jake, were just as excited as I was about the new house. But then the letters kept coming. Each one was more unsettling than the last. The second letter arrived just a few days later, this time with more details. "We saw you move in. Your daughter has a lovely doll collection." The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I read it. How did they know about Emma's dolls? The letters were always unsigned, and there was no return address. We started noticing other strange things around the house. At night, we heard footsteps on the roof, the sound of someone walking slowly, deliberately. Sarah and I would wake up, hearts pounding, but when we checked, there was never anyone there. Emma began complaining about someone tapping on her window at night. I tried to reassure her, but I could see the fear in her eyes. One evening, while Sarah was making dinner and the kids were playing in the living room, I decided to install some security cameras around the house. I needed to catch whoever was tormenting us. That night, as I reviewed the footage, I saw it. A dark figure standing at the edge of our yard, just beyond the reach of our porch light. They stood there, motionless, watching. I called the police, but they couldn't do much with the limited information we had. They increased patrols in our neighborhood, but the letters continued. Each one seemed to know more about us, our routines, our fears. "We know you checked the cameras. It's cute that you think it will help," one letter read. I felt helpless. I couldn't protect my family from this invisible threat. The tension in the house grew, and Sarah and I started arguing more often. The kids were scared to sleep in their own rooms. We were prisoners in our own home, constantly looking over our shoulders. One night, the situation escalated. We were awakened by a loud crash. I grabbed a baseball bat and rushed downstairs to find our living room window shattered. On the floor, amidst the broken glass, was another letter. "Did you enjoy the show?" I looked outside but saw no one. The police came again, but as usual, there was no trace of the intruder. That was the breaking point. I decided to stay up all night, every night, to catch this person. I sat in the living room, lights off, bat in hand, staring out the window. For several nights, nothing happened. I was beginning to think they had finally left us alone. But then, one night, I saw it. The figure was back, standing in our yard, just staring at the house. I felt a mix of fear and rage. I threw open the door and ran outside, bat raised, ready to confront them. But as I reached the spot where they had been standing, they were gone. No trace, no footprints, nothing. I started to doubt my own sanity. Was I imagining things? Were the letters real? The constant fear was taking its toll on all of us. One morning, as I was about to throw out the trash, I found another letter, this time inside our house. Look in the basement. My heart raced. I hadn't spent much time in the basement since we moved in. It was mostly used for storage. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the creaky wooden stairs. The basement was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and boxes we hadn't unpacked yet. As I shone the flashlight around, I noticed a small door at the far end of the room that I hadn't seen before. It was barely visible, hidden behind some old shelves. My hands trembled as I approached it. The door was locked, but I found the key hanging on a nail nearby. With a deep breath, I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell hit me first, damp and earthy, like the air hadn't been disturbed in years. Inside was a small, dark room. The walls were covered in old newspaper clippings and photographs. In the center of the room was a chair, and on it, a notebook. I picked up the notebook and flipped through the pages. It was a diary of sorts, detailing the lives of everyone who had lived in the house before us. The last entries were about us, our daily routines, our habits, even our fears. The handwriting was erratic, almost manic. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The watcher was someone who had lived in this house before us. They were obsessed with it, with the people who lived here. I felt sick to my stomach. I needed to get my family out of there, but I didn't want to panic them. I went upstairs and told Sarah we needed to leave, immediately. She didn't ask questions, just grabbed the kids and started packing. As we were about to leave, I found one last letter in the mailbox: "You can't escape. I'll always be watching." We moved out that same day. We never told the new owners about what had happened, about the letters, the figure, or the hidden room. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wanted to believe we were safe, that the watcher was tied to the house and not to us. But even now, in our new home, far away from that nightmare, I sometimes feel like I'm being watched. I'll catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, or hear faint footsteps at night. I try to tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know the truth. The watcher is still out there, and they always will be. It started as a simple camping trip. My friend Lisa and I had planned a weekend getaway to unwind from the stresses of work and life. We chose a remote spot deep in the woods, far from the noise and bustle of the city. It was supposed to be a relaxing escape, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, the late summer sun casting a warm, golden glow through the trees. The campsite was perfect, nestled beside a clear, bubbling stream with a beautiful view of the surrounding forest. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and started preparing for the evening. After a simple dinner of roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, we sat around the campfire, talking and laughing. The sky darkened, and the stars began to twinkle above us. The forest was alive with the sounds of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. It felt peaceful, almost magical. As the night wore on, we decided to turn in. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves overhead. I crawled into my tent, feeling a sense of contentment. But that feeling didn't last long. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of crying. It was faint at first, barely audible over the gentle murmur of the stream. I lay still, listening. The crying grew louder, more desperate. It sounded like a child, lost and afraid. I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the cool night air. The moon cast an eerie glow over the campsite, illuminating the trees and casting long shadows. I saw Lisa emerging from her tent, her face pale and worried. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my heart pounding. The crying was coming from deeper in the woods. We grabbed our flashlights and followed the sound, calling out to the child. "Hello? Are you okay? Where are you?" The crying led us to a small clearing, where it suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening. We shone our flashlights around, but there was no sign of anyone. Just the stillness of the forest, the trees standing like silent sentinels. We called out again, but there was no response. Just as we were about to turn back, we heard it again, this time from a different direction. The crying seemed to be moving, always just out of reach. We followed it, our fear growing with each step. After what felt like hours, we found ourselves near an old, abandoned cabin. It was more of a ruin, really, with its roof caved in and ivy covering the walls. The crying was coming from inside. Lisa and I exchanged a nervous glance. "Should we go in?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hesitated, but the thought of a lost child spurred me on. "We have to," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The air was cold and damp, filled with the smell of decay. Our flashlights revealed a small, cluttered room with broken furniture and debris scattered everywhere. The crying had stopped again. We searched the cabin, our footsteps echoing in the empty space. There was no sign of a child, just the eerie silence. I was about to suggest we leave when Lisa gasped. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a corner of the room. I shone my flashlight in the direction she was pointing and saw a small, dusty doll lying on the floor. It was old, its clothes tattered and its face faded. There was something unsettling about it, something that made my skin crawl. As I reached down to pick it up, we heard the crying again, this time right behind us. We spun around, but there was no one there. Just the darkness and the cold. "Let's get out of here," Lisa said, her voice shaking. I didn't need any convincing. We hurried out of the cabin and back to our campsite, the crying following us every step of the way. Back at the campsite, we stoked the fire and sat close to its warmth, trying to shake off the fear. The crying had stopped again, but the sense of unease lingered. We didn't sleep much that night, listening for any sign of the mysterious child. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave. The peaceful retreat we had hoped for had turned into a nightmare. As we were packing, I found the doll from the cabin in my tent. I had no idea how it got there, but the sight of it sent chills down my spine. We left the campsite and headed back to town, the doll left behind in the woods. But the crying haunted us. Even after we returned home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At night, I would wake up to the faint sound of crying, always just out of reach. Lisa and I talked about what had happened, trying to make sense of it. We read about other reports of strange sounds and sightings in those woods, but no one had any explanations. The crying child remained a mystery. I don't go camping anymore. The thought of being in the woods, alone and vulnerable, is too much to bear. I still hear the crying sometimes, a reminder of that terrifying night. I'll never forget the fear, the feeling of helplessness, the sound of that lost, desperate child. It was a stormy night, and I was driving home alone. The rain was coming down in sheets, my windshield wipers working overtime to keep the road visible. I had just finished a long shift at work and was eager to get home, sink into bed, and forget about the world for a while. The road was deserted, the only sound the steady drumming of rain on the roof of my car. I was about halfway home when I saw her, a young woman standing by the side of the road, drenched and desperate for a ride. She was waving frantically, her eyes wide with fear. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. She looked harmless enough, and I couldn't just leave her there in the storm. She climbed into the passenger seat, shivering and soaked to the bone. I handed her a towel from the back seat, and she wrapped it around herself gratefully. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think anyone would stop." "No problem," I replied, trying to sound casual. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" She hesitated, glancing out the window. "I was on my way home when my car broke down. I've been walking for hours." I nodded, feeling a pang of sympathy. "Where do you need to go?" She gave me an address that was on my way, and we set off. The silence in the car was heavy, filled only with the sound of rain. I tried to make small talk, but she was distant, her responses short and vague. Something about her seemed off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As we drove, I noticed the temperature in the car dropping. I adjusted the heater, but it didn't seem to make a difference. The cold seemed to seep into my bones, and I shivered despite myself. The woman remained silent, staring straight ahead. We reached a stretch of road that was particularly dark and desolate. The trees on either side loomed like shadows, their branches swaying in the wind. That's when it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her reflection in the window. But it wasn't her face I saw. It was a distorted, twisted visage, with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. My heart skipped a beat, and I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to keep my composure. I glanced at her, and she was just as I had first seen her, pale, wet, and shivering. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, a trick of the light and the storm. But the fear gnawed at me, making it hard to breathe. As we approached a bend in the road, she suddenly spoke. "You should slow down," she said, her voice strangely calm. I did as she said, my nerves on edge. As we rounded the bend, I saw it, a fallen tree blocking the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just inches from the massive trunk. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I turned to thank her, but she was gone. The passenger seat was empty, the towel she had wrapped around herself lying in a crumpled heap. I looked around frantically, but there was no sign of her. I got out of the car, the rain soaking me instantly, and called out into the night. There was no response, just the howling wind and the relentless rain. I felt a surge of panic. I had seen her get into the car, felt her presence beside me. Where had she gone? I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and started searching the area, but there was no trace of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Shivering from the cold and fear, I got back into the car and sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened. I replayed the events in my mind, but they only became more confusing. I decided to drive back to town and report what had happened to the police. When I arrived at the station, I was met with skepticism. The officer on duty listened to my story, a look of incredulity on his face. "Are you sure you weren't just seeing things? It's a nasty night out there." "I'm telling you, she was real. She got into my car, and then she was gone," I insisted. He sighed and nodded. "All right, we'll send someone out to check the area." But I wouldn't get my hopes up. We get all sorts of strange reports on nights like this. I left the station feeling frustrated and unsettled. I drove home, my mind racing with thoughts of the mysterious hitchhiker. When I finally crawled into bed, I couldn't sleep. The image of her distorted reflection haunted me. Over the next few days, I tried to put the incident behind me, but it kept creeping back into my thoughts. I started researching local legends and ghost stories, hoping to find some explanation. That's when I stumbled upon the story of a young woman who had died in a car accident on that very stretch of road. According to the legend, she was often seen hitchhiking, trying to find her way home. Those who stopped to pick her up would experience strange occurrences, and she would always disappear before reaching her destination. The legend sent chills down my spine. Had I encountered her ghost? I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. But the experience had left a mark on me, a lingering fear that wouldn't go away. I avoided that road from then on, taking a longer route to and from work.